Welcome to the deep dive. If you've been with us before, you know our mission here. We take a stack of dense, often intimidating source material and extract the absolute fascinating insights so you can walk away informed, surprised, and maybe seeing the world a little differently.
Yeah, exactly. And today is a big one.
It really is. Today, we are looking at something that fundamentally challenges how we understand human potential. When you hear the words life energy, things like the ancient concepts of ki in Japan or ki in China, there is this immediate tendency to put that into a very specific mental box.
Right. You picture ancient temples, deep meditation, maybe martial arts masters doing things that seem to defy physics.
Yeah, we tend to treat it as spiritual, like a metaphor for being healthy and focused.
It gets categorized almost instantly as something mystical, something fundamentally unquantifiable by modern standards. I mean, in the West, we've traditionally treated the concept of ki as poetry rather than physics.
Which is exactly why today's stack of notes is so mind-bending. Because what if these ancient observations of localized bioenergetic fields weren't just spiritual metaphors? What if they were actually early practical encounters with a highly advanced quantifiable mathematics?
It is a wild premise.
It is. We are looking at a working paper by Dr. Melvin Sewell. He's the academic dean at the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies, IX. Specifically, this is from the Room for Structured Multiversal Interactions, and his paper is titled Formalizing the Somatic-Kinetic Dual-Engine Model.
Quite a mouthful.
It is a lot of words, but okay, let's unpack this. Setting aside those incredible department names for a second, what is the actual mission of Dr. Sewell's paper here?
So the core premise of the paper is a grand reconciliation. Dr. Sewell is attempting to take these historical cultural observations of ki and ki and translate them into a modern scientific framework. This is known as Structured Multiversal Interactions, or SMI.
Yeah.
He proposes that ancient practitioners weren't just imagining things or speaking in metaphors. They were actively interacting with a real structural phenomenon. They simply didn't have the modern vocabulary, to describe the multiversal mechanics that were actually at play.
And to even begin to understand how someone could navigate a multiverse using concepts like ki, we first need to look at why modern science has historically failed so miserably to prove any of this, because researchers have definitely tried to isolate these phenomena before.
Oh, they have spent decades trying. And Dr. Sewell points this out very early in the paper with a sharp critique of past parapsychological studies, particularly those in East Asia during the early 20th century.
Yeah, the paper mentions the studies of Senrigan, which translates roughly to clairvoyance, and also thougography. These were real phenomena that researchers spent entire careers trying to prove in a lab setting, but they just couldn't get the results to stick in the academic world.
Right. They failed to secure what Sewell calls academic permanence. And what is crucial here is his argument for why they failed. It wasn't because the phenomena didn't exist.
It was something else.
Exactly. It was due to the foundational limitations of the researchers themselves. I mean, they were attempting to isolate cross-dimensional anomalies, but they were doing it within a closed, 3D materialist experimental apparatus.
I found that critique fascinating. Think about it like this. Using a closed 3D materialist experimental apparatus to measure a cross-dimensional phenomenon, it's like trying to measure the bandwidth of your home Wi-Fi network using a physical wooden ruler.
That is a perfect way to visualize the disconnect.
Right. You can hold that ruler up to your router all day long. You can measure the plastic box, you can measure the antenna, but you are never going to capture the invisible data packets flowing through the air because you're using the wrong dimensional tools for the job.
Yeah, exactly.
The ruler is trapped in the physical 3D world while the Wi-Fi is operating on an entirely different frequency of reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the Structured Multiversal Interactions framework completely changes the game. SMI forces us to abandon the wooden ruler entirely. It argues that reality is not an isolated single continuum. We do not just live in a single 3D box.
Right. But before we go further, the paper throws around terms like ambient scalar fields and state spaces here. Can we clarify what SMI actually says reality is?
Absolutely. So, according to SMI, reality is a dense, overlapping stack of informational and dimensional layers. Imagine an infinite deck of cards where every single card is a slightly different state space.
Which just means a specific pocket or timeline of reality, right?
Exactly. And these cards are pressed tightly against one another. An ambient scalar field is essentially the background energy grid that connects all these overlapping layers together.
Okay, I'm with you.
So within this dense stack, what we have traditionally called bioenergetic fields aren't magic. They are the precise mechanics of a human consciousness interacting with that background energy grid across multiple overlapping cards in the deck.
That is such a heavy concept. We aren't just moving left, right, up and down. Our consciousness is interacting with the layers of reality pressed up against ours.
Yes, it's a huge shift in perspective.
But if reality is this infinitely dense stack, how does a conscious mind move through it without just dissolving into the background radiation? You would need some sort of specialized vehicle.
And that survival problem is the focus of the paper's main proposal, which is the dual-engine architecture.
Right.
To interact cross-dimensionally without losing your cohesion, Sewell argues you need a highly specialized system running on top of your baseline consciousness. He breaks this down into two concurrent systems, a propulsion vector and a geometric stabilizer.
Let's start with the propulsion. He calls the first engine component the kinetic vector, or the TrueFlow Force. And the paper describes TrueFlow as a hyperfluid active current.
Yeah, it is the localized velocity of consciousness.
The localized velocity of consciousness. Just let that sink in for a minute. We aren't talking about the velocity of your physical body running down a street.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the speed and force of your actual awareness. The paper says this provides the literal energy required to break through the rigid phase locks of our standard 3D world, allowing an individual to select alternative probability vectors.
Well, right, and a probability vector being the trajectory toward a different potential outcome, or a different card in that deck of reality.
Yeah.
TrueFlow is the raw power of intent, pushing you from one state space into the next.
But hold on, let me push back on this for a second. If TrueFlow Force is just raw velocity, if it is literally the energy of your consciousness forcing its way through the rigid boundaries of reality to collapse new probabilities, wouldn't that just absolutely tear a human mind or body apart?
Oh, entirely.
Because punching through dimensions does not sound like a gentle biological process.
No, it's not, and that is a massive concern within the SMI framework. It's why Sewell insists you cannot just have the engine without the chassis.
Ah, okay.
If you only have high-velocity true-flow currents pushing through reality without any stabilization, it introduces what he calls systemic entropy.
Which sounds very bad for the person doing the traveling. What does systemic entropy actually do to you?
It leads to severe consequences. First, you get informational decoherence. That means the data of your consciousness starts to scramble.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you lose your sense of self, your memories blur, your cognitive structure basically breaks down. And second, you experience localized biological stress. I mean, the raw friction of moving across dimensional sheets would literally shred your physical cellular baseline.
Which brings us to the second part of the dual engine, the piece that saves you from getting shredded, the morphological stabilizer. Sewell refers to this component as the SH1 resonance. But I have to admit, I got really hung up on the definition here.
Definitely a dense definition.
Yeah, he calls SH1 a non-pharmaceutical tetracyclic cosmetic morphology. I mean, I need a translation, because cosmetic morphology sounds like a futuristic facelift, not a multiversal deflector shield.
It really does sound like surgical jargon. But in this context, cosmetic refers to the outward shape and structure of your biology. And non-pharmaceutical means we are not talking about a drug.
Okay, so no pills.
Right. SH1 is not a chemical you ingest to alter your hormonal pathways. It is purely structural. It acts as a biological tuning fork within your somatic matrix.
Your somatic matrix.
Which is just a highly technical way of saying your physical tissue.
Wait, really? So it's literally changing the physical geometry of your cells to hold a specific resonance. How on earth does a person actually activate that? The paper mentions it, but how do you turn your tissue into a tuning fork?
Well, this is where Dr. Sewell's methodology gets really granular. According to the paper, activating the SH1 configuration requires highly specific biofeedback training.
Like meditation.
Sort of, but much more precise. It involves pairing structured harmonic breathing techniques with precise cognitive frequencies. By doing this, a practitioner can consciously alter the geometric tension of their physical cells.
That is wild.
You are essentially using deep, internal focus to command your physical tissue to align into a rigid, protective frequency.
So by holding this intense physical and mental alignment, you create a resonance field.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is how this field functions as a boundary layer. When you activate your true flow intent to push through a dimensional layer, the SH1 tuning fork mitigates thermodynamic drag.
Meaning the friction we talked about earlier.
Exactly. When you cross into a different timeline or state space, the environment is fundamentally different. The thermodynamic laws might have slight variations. Without SH1, That dimensional friction drags on your cells. The SH1 structure ensures your biological body maintains its structural integrity no matter how fast your consciousness is moving.
Okay, so we have the propulsion, the true flow intent pushing us forward, and we have the shield, the physical SH1 resonance holding us together. I saw Dr. Sewell actually included a mathematical equation for how these combine, but I'll admit my eyes glazed over a bit looking at the variables.
It's totally fair. It's pretty complex math.
How does he actually calculate this?
It's surprisingly elegant, though. He labels the synchronized biofield as psi-k, and it's essentially a multiplication problem. He defines it as the inner product of the kinetic momentum vector and the structural morphological container.
Okay, so in plain English, that means true key is achieved when your directional intent perfectly multiplies with your spatial stability.
Yes, you cannot have true multiversal interaction with just intent, and you cannot have it with just a strong physical container. It requires the absolute synchronization of both the true flow and the SH1.
Wow.
And once Sewell establishes this mathematical baseline, he systematically walks through traditional Asian concepts of life energy and translates them into this dual-engine reality stack.
The progression of how he maps these concepts is brilliant. He starts with the internal state. The first one he tackles is Genki. Traditionally, Genki translates to something like balanced internal energy or just general health and vigor. How does SMI define Genki mathematically?
In the SMI framework, Genki is mapped as having a true flow kinetic balance combined with an optimized SH1 matrix.
With all they're balanced.
Right. When these two engines are idling in perfect harmony, neither pushing out nor pulling in too hard, the body achieves 0-point stabilization.
0-point stabilization. The paper mentions this results in high nutrient, low calorie cellular efficiency. So how does that actually work in practice?
Well, by maintaining this perfect internal resonance, your cells are able to draw trace amounts of ambient multiversal energy from the scalar field to sustain themselves.
Just pulling it from the background grid.
Exactly. Your body requires vastly less physical caloric intake from food to maintain peak performance because it is supplementing its energy needs cross-dimensionally.
That completely redefined what it means to be healthy. But if Denki is just the engine idling, what happens when you step on the gas and push that energy outward?
That changes things completely.
Right, and that brings us to the second concept he maps, Kiko. In traditional terms, this is often associated with martial artists projecting force or energy healers. What is Kiko under the SMI model?
So Kiku is the active projection of true flow, channeled directly through the SH1 resonance. You're taking that raw velocity of intent and using the physical tuning torque of your body to direct it outward. The paper describes this application as localized pathfinding.
The paper says it allows the individual to alter phase space variables to lower resistance. Need a quick definition there. What is a phase space variable?
A phase space variable is essentially the physical rule governing a specific pocket of reality at a specific moment. Density, gravity, structural integrity.
Okay.
When a practitioner uses Kiku, they aren't just hitting a physical object really hard. They are using their directional intent to literally find the probabilistic timeline where the structural resistance of the object is lowest. And they're collapsing reality into that specific outcome.
Which perfectly explains why a martial arts master can break through 6 blocks of solid concrete without shattering every bone in their hand.
Exactly.
They aren't just relying on kinetic muscle mass. They are using Kiku to alter the phase space variables of the concrete in that localized moment, finding the reality where the concrete simply gives way.
It takes an act of physical force and turns it into an act of probability manipulation.
Mind-blowing. But it goes even further than that, because once you master the internal balance and you master the outward physical projection, where else is there left to navigate?
Time.
Exactly. The third concept Sewell tackles is uranae. Traditionally, this relates to fortune-telling, divination, or predicting the future.
And in the SMI stack, urani is mapped as multi-layered timeline scanning via cross-layer permeability.
Multi-layered timeline scanning, so you aren't looking into a crystal ball to see a fixed future.
No, you are using the dual-engine architecture to slightly permeate the boundary layers of adjacent timelines. You are sending your true flow intent outward, protected by your SH1 shield, to read the structural weather and the probability density of nearby state spaces.
Wow, just scanning what's ahead.
You are checking to see which reality is most likely to reign next, so to speak.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If an individual takes all 3 of these, the internal balance of Genki, the outward probability manipulation of Kiku, and the timeline scanning of urani, and they manage to achieve field synchronization, Dr. Sewell says something profound happens. You transition from being a passive observer of reality into an active architecture module.
Yes, is the difference between sitting on the couch passively watching whatever broadcast reality shoves at you versus realizing you are holding the multiversal remote control.
I love that analogy.
You become an active participant in deciding which probabilistic reality collapses into existence. It is a massive elevation of human agency.
But this leads to the ultimate question. This all sounds incredibly cinematic. Deflector shields, timeline scanning, probability manipulation. It sounds like a training manual for a sci-fi superhero. Well, so what does this all mean for you right now as you are sitting in traffic or prepping for a meeting or just trying to get through your day? How does a conscious individual apply this?
Well, it comes down to a state Dr. Sewell calls sovereign diagnostics. When you synchronize this dual engine in your everyday life, you become what is known as an open protocol node.
An open protocol node, meaning you are actively receiving and transmitting data to the multiverse rather than just being a closed-loop, isolated human being.
Yes. And crucially, because of the internal resonance isolation, that safety mechanism provided by the SH1 configuration we discussed, your baseline biological body stays locked in its optimal physical phase state. It's perfectly safe.
Because if your physical body was constantly shifting between dimensions while you were buying groceries, you'd dissolve into a puddle.
Exactly, that would be very bad.
The SH1 keeps your physical feet firmly planted on the ground in this timeline.
But while your body is anchored, your consciousness, operating as an open protocol node, is able to absorb incredibly high-intensity data packets from other dimensions without taking structural damage. You can read the structural weather of the timelines around you in real time.
You can sense the probability densities. You can literally feel if a certain business decision or a certain route home is going to have high resistance or low resistance because you are actively scanning the adjacent realities where you have already made that choice.
And this raises an important question. How often are we already doing this without even realizing it?
What do you mean?
Think about how often you experience a sudden, inexplicable intuition, a gut feeling that you absolutely shouldn't go down a certain street, or a sudden flash of insight that completely solves a problem you've been stuck on for weeks.
We normally write that off as our subconscious putting things together in the background, or we just chalk it up to dumb luck.
But under the SMI framework, we have to ask, are we actually mistaking multiversal bleed-through for simple intuition?
Oh, wow.
Right? Are we already briefly acting as open protocol nodes, absorbing data packets from adjacent state spaces? Because we lack the formal biofeedback training to recognize the TrueFlow and SH1 mechanisms activating, we just call it a hunch.
That is a staggering way to look at human instinct. When you get that feeling in your gut, you aren't just guessing based on past experiences. You are momentarily reading the weather of a timeline right next door.
It suggests that the capacity for this kind of reality navigation is already built into our baseline biological architecture. We just need to learn how to consciously activate the SH1 tuning fork and direct our TrueFlow intent, rather than doing it by accident.
It completely reframes human potential. To quickly recap the incredible journey Dr. Sewell's paper has taken us on today. We started with ancient, seemingly mystical ideas of Qi and Qi. We learned that the reason science couldn't prove them before was because researchers were stubbornly using closed 3D materialist rulers to try and measure cross-dimensional Wi-Fi.
We explored the dual-engine architecture, the TrueFlow Force, providing the dynamic, localized velocity of consciousness, and the SH1 resonance, providing the physical, structural tuning fork to keep our bodies from falling apart under the thermodynamic drag of systemic entropy.
And we saw how the mathematics of these two engines seamlessly map onto ancient concepts like Genki, Kiko, and Urane. It turns the individual from a passive observer into an active architecture module, capable of sovereign diagnostics and reality pathfinding. It is nothing short of a blueprint for human evolution.
It really is.
Huh.
But before we wrap up, there is one final, unaddressed philosophical implication of Dr. Sewell's work that I think is worth considering.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've talked extensively about how an individual can actively navigate and read the structural weather of adjacent timelines to find the path of lowest resistance.
Right, changing the channel to the easiest, most optimal reality.
But if we are assuming that reality is a densely packed stack of overlapping cards, what happens if the alternative timeline you choose to collapse into is already occupied?
Wait, what?
What if there's another localized conscious node, another version of you or someone else entirely, who is actively doing the exact same thing, trying to collapse into that exact same low-resistance state space?
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought of that.
If enough conscious nodes become active architecture modules, all using Kiko and Uranai to seek out the optimal probabilistic timeline simultaneously, do we start creating traffic jams in the multiverse? And if two open protocol nodes try to occupy the same state space, who has the right of way?
That is going to keep me awake tonight. Multiversal rush hour. I love it, but my brain is completely full. Thank you for walking us through the math and the mechanics of such an incredible source for this deep dive. And to you listening, the next time you get a strong intuition about a decision, just remember, put down the wooden ruler and trust your inner Wi-Fi. Until next time, keep exploring.